Hello and good morning, everybody. Just give us a couple seconds here while we let a few people filter in. If you're here for the European Water Chestnut webinar, you've found the right place. So fill up your coffee, hang tight. We'll begin in just about 1 minute. Okay, before we begin today, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that the Invasive Species Centre honors the long history of First Nations, Inuit, Métis Nation people, and the lands that are now known as Canada. And at the IC, we strive to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and their teachings about our Earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are really important to us, and we'll continue to listen, we'll continue to learn about how we can develop good relationships with Indigenous peoples, the lands, and the waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Centre respectfully acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. If you're new to the ISC, the Invasive Species Centre is a not-for-profit organization, and we connect stakeholders, knowledge, and technology to prevent the introduction and the spread of invasive species that harm Canada's environment, economy, and society. Today's session is one of our monthly webinars where we highlight the latest and greatest on invasive species research, programs, and policy happenings all across Ontario and Canada. All our past webinars are available on the ISC's YouTube page, and I'd encourage you to check those out. They're a great resource, especially if we have new staff joining your respective organizations or just want to learn a little bit more about some timely species. We've got some great content upcoming on our webinar series as well. Our September webinar is only days away, so we're looking forward to that, as well as we have another webinar upcoming on the latest developments with respect to hemlock woolly adelgid in Central Ontario. Before we get started with today's webinar, there's a couple things I want to mention. There's going to be time for questions at the end of the webinar, but if questions hit you at any moment, please go ahead and log them in the question function through Zoom at any time. If you have any questions or technical issues with Zoom and the platform, please feel free to use the chat function. We've got our staff ready to help you out as best we can, so that's a great resource for us. We also have enabled closed captioning for today, so if you'd like to follow along in that way, feel free to turn it on. You can access that through the taskbar. Lastly, there's going to be a very brief survey that's sent around to all registrants at the end of the webinar. If you could take the time to fill that out, it really helps us make sure that we're meeting the mark for your webinar needs in the future, talking about the right species or issues or programs or developments that are of interest to you. So I'd appreciate you taking a couple minutes to fill that out quickly. Sorry, just a bit of a lag this morning. There we are. All right, so welcome to the show. I'll turn my camera on very quickly just so I can say hi. I'm battling poor bandwidth this morning, but just wanted to say hi and good morning to everybody. Today's webinar is entitled European Water Chestnut Rapid Response Program in the Welland River. And hello, Karen. And we've got a few main goals today. The first kind of key goal we're trying to do with this webinar is to introduce you to this pesky invasive aquatic plant. The second goal is we're hoping to share some hot off the press results from our first year of program implementation as we try and eradicate the species from the Welland River. And the third is just at a bit of a higher level to share some perspectives on how we engage the community throughout this action and this program, and designed a program that I think is kind of key, built right within the community. And I think there's some transferable lessons in there. Even if European water chestnut might not be your species of interest, there's lots of opportunity to take some of the lessons learned out of that and support your own programming. My name is Colin Casson. I'm the policy manager at the Invasive Species Centre, and joining me today is my colleague, Karen Alexander. Hey, Karen. Karen is the policy coordinator, and she's the brains behind the EWC Welland program. So not with us today, but I did want to give a quick shout out because of their excellent work this summer is our field team lead, Katie Church, and the field team members, Bree, Mason, Brendan, and Liz. Definitely worth a quick shout out to them. They did all the hard work this summer, and they've been featured as of this morning, actually, on Ontario, all CBC stations on Radio 1 for kind of a fun little tour, an audio tour, I guess, if you will, through the program this summer and some of the great gains they made. So I would encourage you to check that out. It's very timely. So I'll go ahead and save some bandwidth here, Karen, maybe if you want to shut off too, and we'll be good to go. All right, now we're rolling. I hope. There we go. So a very quick roadmap for where we're headed today in the presentation. We're going to spend some time introducing you to European water chestnut, and we'll also cover some of the context around what that species is with respect to the province of Ontario. Karen's then going to lead the charge, and she's going to take you through the Welland River Rapid Response Program from a program level, and we'll talk about the work that the team has achieved in the Welland River this summer. As they just wrapped up last Friday. We'd love to open the floor for questions, as I said before, at the end of the presentation, so please make use of the question function and pop them in at any time. And without much further ado, let's jump into the content. So to put this into a little bit of context, I think this is kind of a useful starting point for the conversation today. Really, prevention is ideal. I think that's a lesson that we all kind of know intuitively, but there's some great work that really backs that up and supports that conversation with a little bit more specificity. And really, I think there's a few things that hold true. That y-axis there, where we're seeing cost increase over time as area occupied and kind of the status, if you would, of an invasive species continues to take hold. You could also use that as another proxy for probability of eradication or efficiency of eradication. I think it's the same concept, really. And so to tie this into European water chestnut, the focal species of the conversation today, I think it's probably best to think about us just to the right side of species arrival there, somewhere between prevention and eradication. So in that kind of mid-green level of eradication, I think that's a reasonable approximation of where we're at roughly with respect to EWC in Ontario, and certainly with respect to EWC in the Welland River. And really, just as this invasion curve goes, to throw a few other species that we might be more familiar with there, I think if we're thinking about emerald ash borer, we're looking farther to the right side of this graphic, where, still challenging to manage, and that's within an Ontario and kind of Eastern Canada context. There's still many places where EAB has yet to fully land and realize itself, but just to throw out a couple kind of more common examples of species and where we're at. Eurasian water milfoil might be like the far extreme of the right where the upper arrow is there. So I think it's helpful to think about these species with respect to how do we act, how do we invest in these species, and what can a likely outcome be on this kind of general economic return scale. A really helpful resource, I think, to structure our thinking on today. And just also to give a little bit more context with respect to Ontario for any out of province viewers, just wanted to talk quickly about, I think, the central underpinning for our work on this species. This is the Ontario Invasive Species Act, which was first passed in 2015. And so the Coles Notes version of that act and that piece of legislation is that it regulates the prevention and management of invasive species in Ontario. And there's 22 species that are listed as prohibited, kind of 2 classes of species, if you would, and 11 species that are listed as restricted, and EWC does fall into regulation under this act. And just a quick kind of additional update as of January 1st, 2022, so just 6, 7, 8 months ago now, for the first time we had the regulation of a carrier, and that's the overland transportation of watercraft. So that's really obviously an important vector for a species like European water chestnut or any aquatic invasive species for that matter. And so just wanted to kind of note that there's a bit of an underpinning there in the legislation with respect to EWC and all species more broadly. Now on to unfortunately, the star of the show for today, European water chestnut. If this is a newer species to you, just wanted to throw a few slides of primer and background on life history and help you understand the species, because really as with any invasive species response, obviously the life history traits and the species, the details is where the devil hides on this one. So we really need to understand how the species, the biology of the species, how the species spreads in order to be effective on it. So, it's prohibited species in Ontario under that previously mentioned ISA. And I'll use interchangeably European water chestnut and EWC for the sake of the conversation today. So EWC is an aquatic invasive plant. It poses a pretty significant threat to Canada's and Ontario's economy, society, and environment. We'll talk about those specific threats in a few minutes, but it does tend to check all boxes here. Key pieces of information on the species as we're thinking about how can we be effective in managing it. First off, if there ever was an aquatic invasive plant that has really key traits to help us be effective in management, I would posture that this is that species. It's an annual plant, which is a really helpful consideration with respect to designing effective management programs. It's dependent on seed production for reproduction. So on the right image there, you're seeing a picture of a chestnut. The nut itself, those would form under the plant. So I'll show you some pictures in a few minutes. With respect to some other kind of key features that would help you identify this plant, small white flowers. In most parts of Ontario, we're looking at kind of mid to late July for flower emergence there. So you see a small one at the center of the image on the left-hand side. And just want to note, because it's a frequently asked question, obviously the nuts really bear no resemblance to kind of water chestnut that we would use more broadly as a cooking food. So similar by name, but not by image. And the nuts form underneath the plant too, and they start to begin dropping sometime in August. It's a bit variable from our experience based on where this plant is established in Canada and in Ontario. In the Welland area, that's the most south distribution of the plant. And so some of these dates, you know, if you could cheat them by a week or two, perhaps just to adjust for your season, but really in Welland, we were seeing the nuts start to drop kind of mid-August and throughout the month of August, really. Okay, so some nice up close and personal pictures of the plant here. So each seed is going to produce a plant that can have 10 or maybe a dozen stems. So we're seeing quite a few of those stems here. And each stem is going to terminate in a rosette. These individual leaves they've got on their stem, a nice kind of, think of it as the plant's PFD, which helps raise it up to as a floating plant on top of the water column. And so if a rosette breaks off from that main population or from its main root, which we see oftentimes, depending on the system you're working in, some with more fluctuating water, we can see it pop off because of a storm or maybe a heavy weight caused by boating or any sort of other disturbance. Maybe it's waterfowl moving around or fishing happening or angling happening in the area. We can see that rosette just kind of float downriver. It's got PFDs built in, so we've seen it move down through the Welland system. You know, many kilometers in terms of increasing its distribution. These things like to go for a ride. And the rosettes, they're pretty easy to pick up. With respect to the Welland system, you know, we would look for it in and amongst its peers. So other floating plants, and really there's not very many. There's a few species of algae that are floating that form dense mats, but really this is quite unique. You know, some of the native water lilies, white water lily and yellow as well, being the kind of similar-ish looking plants. One of the good distinguishing features within that system is just the shade of green. It's got a beautiful emerald shade of green, and as well as these kind of nice toothed leaves, I guess, if you would. So it's relatively easy to spot. There's not too many close lookalikes once you get to know the species. On the underside here, we're looking at a few. I think I've seen 1, 2, maybe 3 on the other side. Seeds itself. So some of these rosettes can pump out up to 20 seeds. So a really high volume producer. And when the seeds start to mature, so I would guess this is probably an image from maybe the second week of July, something like that. But as we go a little bit farther towards August and they start to mature, these seeds are going to start to harden as opposed to the kind of fleshy green exterior that you're seeing here. And they're going to start to turn color towards a dark brown or even black before they drop off by mid-August in this system. And the life cycle of EWC is going to lead to exponential growth. That's kind of one of the key takeaways here, even though it is an annual and has some built-in helpful traits, if you would, from a management perspective. We really need to get ahead of this just because of the sheer volume that one mature plant can produce. And so for a little bit of background, like many of our aquatic invasive plants that are present in Ontario, it's native to Europe and different parts of Asia and Africa as well. And there are no kind of natural enemies, if you would, in North America and in that context. So really kind of right in lockstep with many other aquatic invasive species and invasive species more broadly. Really, there's nothing keeping its populations in check naturally. And in terms of where we're looking for this plant, this is a great image out of Voyageur Provincial Park. And so this is the right kind of environment to go out and find European water chestnut if we're out chestnut hunting. And we're going to look for slow moving areas. Think of typical areas where rooted floating macrophytes or vegetation can be found. So we're looking for really slow moving waters in and amongst water lilies like you're seeing here. This is the right kind of habitat. So back embayments or even slow necks of the river like we found. We'll talk a little bit more about those. We're looking for full sun. We're looking for soft substrates. We're looking for nutrient-rich waters. The Welland River has many of those in spades. And so this plant can grow at different depths. We can see it up to, half a meter, all the way, a more typical range would be something in and amongst 2 meters or approximately 6 feet. We can see it in even deeper waters up to 4 meters deep. The Welland River is not a deep system compared to some of the other systems that you'll find this plant in. And so we tend to find it in, a meter to 2 meter kind of range typically. And in terms of what do you see underwater here that we can't see in this image, the European water chestnut would be, it's a rooted plant. It's got these filamentous roots that intertwine with other stems of European water chestnut, maybe in and amongst other fallen logs, things like that, but it's going to be rooted in a nice nutrient-rich under sediment as well. Oops, sorry. In terms of the impacts, I think depending on who the audience is, we might spend a little more time in one versus another, but I just want to make the note that it does tend to check all these boxes. We're thinking about these through economic, ecological, and sort of more societal-based impacts. With respect to economic impacts, this is not a desirable form of waterfront vegetation. So just like in lockstep with other invasive species, invasive aquatic plants such as recreational water milfoil, there's a few great papers that link presence of this invasive submerged macrophyte presence with declines in property value. We do see, of course, invasive aquatic plants having negative impacts on commercial and recreational fisheries as well. In terms of social impacts, really, this is not a plant you want to go boating through. You do not want to go swimming through. If you want to use a nice sandy beach, which I think is indicative of Voyageur Provincial Park, these seeds that wash up on the shore that I've showed earlier, really not something we want to be stepping on, of course. And so negative impacts with respect to how we use our water. Ecological impacts, these are really dense forming monocultures as well, just like a number of its peers. So killing native vegetation or outcompeting native vegetation, temporary reductions in dissolved oxygen levels, which could lead to fish kills, depending on the time of year, just like any other form of abundant underwater biomass, and also impacts on fish populations and also species at risk habitat, of which the Welland River does have. This is just a nice old picture of what we're talking about with respect to the seeds of this plant. So, if you have a look at this, we're starting to see a little bit more of a sharp and jagged edge as opposed to some of the earlier pictures of seeds. This would be a mature seed. I'm not sure exactly what week we would have picked this, but I would target this as kind of so I'm struggling with my clicker here. This would be a great example of a species or a seed rather that we're finding in the month of August. So mature, dark, black. Sometimes these do start to float, and so we're going to see it be able to travel fair amounts of distances. Eventually, it will become no longer have its buoyant structure, fall down in the sediment, overwinter there, hang out until next year, and then germinate into one of those emerald green plants next year in the spring and summer. To give you a little bit more content as I kind of end this introduction to European water chestnut and start to shift into context of Ontario, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a context for where reports of the species have been found. So where it came from in the late 1870s, a gardener at Cambridge Botanical Garden in Massachusetts introduced it into several ponds, unfortunately for us. And it spread through northeastern states into Quebec and Ontario. And so really, I think a core part of its range, if we start to look at iNaturalist or EDDMapS, where this map came from, really tend to be in New England. And we've seen a lot being invested in those states in particular, just trying to knock it back and reclaim some waterways. So With respect to its Ontario presence and the short version of the story in Ontario, this is the third population under management with respect to southeastern Ontario, southwestern Ontario, and Niagara region in the Welland River. And there's a couple of other projects I wanted to highlight that really gave us an important springboard, I guess, for our experience with EWC. And the first I wanted to note there is the Kingston population, which is under management with Ducks Unlimited Canada and their local staff there, right around Wolfe Island, if you're familiar with the area. And they've done tremendous work on that program and really given us a lot of experience downloaded over to our program, so really appreciate that. And then the OG of Ontario, if you will, Ontario Parks has been engaged in a battle with Voyager through Voyager Provincial Park with European Water Chestnut. They've got a control program and management program that's been working well for them. And I just wanted to highlight as well, so many pieces of information that have informed our management decisions have been coming through that. And I think this is a great example of a project in progress here. With respect to the Voyager population, that really is the poster child, I think, for those social impacts and just impacts on how those seeds can negatively impact how beautiful sandy beaches are accessible or become less accessible. So just wanted to note those two programs and show appreciation as well for the great bits of information that they've been able to contribute to our program. And I think to tie it into the Welland project in particular, which is really our focus from here on out, it's a great story, which I think is probably a story we want to see replicated with respect to more invasive species, specifically on the origin story of how it was found. And so in late summer in August 2020, there was an off-duty DFO biologist who isn't an invasive species expert, but had seen an image of that plant once upon a time and kind of triggered deep in the back of their brain when they were paddling on the Welland. Just triggered something that I think that doesn't seem right. I don't know that species, get that spider sense tingling a little bit. And they made the great decision to report that to EDDMapS, which again is really this community science and citizen scientists and structure that I think we all rely on for all invasive species reports outside of our many government partners and other partners doing formal surveys for other species. But this is really an important kind of element of this story. And the report was easily, beautiful pictures. I'll show you in a second what they look like, but it was a really easy to confirm scenario and situation because of the quality of the pictures. And I think just, that person having deep in their brain, this doesn't feel right. I think that's that invasive species. Maybe that's not a chestnut species that somebody was talking about once or I saw online. And so the location information is conveyed there. We saw 4 patches on their paddle and on their EDDMapS report that day. So we were able to have pretty high confidence coming out of those reports coming into the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters to be able to have a high confidence, I guess, that was EWC. These are a few of the pictures here. Anybody who's familiar with EWC would know hands-on within 2 seconds of looking at these images. There's really not a lot else that looks like it. So high confidence that indeed, if these pictures were taken where they say they were, looks like there's EWC present. And so in terms of how that triggered the next step, that was August 2020. And then the following summer, we were able to go out with support of Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry and our partners at Ducks Unlimited Canada, and basically go and try and do a delimitation survey, understand where it was, and understand beyond where those reports came from, which are the purple dots in the center of the figure. There's 4 of them there, right within the green line, which is basically where Ducks was able to survey. And our staff were able to survey as well. We started up at the blue dot, which is Wellandport, it's EC Brown, so just west of Wellandport, if you're familiar with the area. And then the farthest east blue dot would be the city of Welland, right at the recreational and shipping canal there. So we're able to do the delimitation survey there and figure out where it was, figure out where it wasn't to inform future management decision making. And the main takeaway I think from our 21 survey was really that there's a heavily infested stretch of the river, but we were able to survey well outside of both ends of it, and I think we were able to place an approximate understanding of time of invasion and where we were on that invasion curve back to one of the first slides. And so we had high confidence at that point that, okay, this population is not by any means out of hand. It's a reasonable situation for rapid response. Let's figure out what that program could look like to achieve the goal of eradication. And it's a bit of an interesting system if you're not familiar with the Welland River. So it's a natural water body. It's not too far from the Grand River in that neck of the province as well. And I think where it's particularly interesting is generally flow direction is a little bit variable, which is kind of interesting for rivers. It's not a fast moving system by any means. It has lots of those slow moving areas. So if we think back to habitat type, unfortunately, it's good ground for EWC. And if we look at the east side here, so right where there's a blue dot that says N beside it, you'll see a water body there, and that's the Welland Canal. And so there's a shipping canal and a recreational canal. Both of those are hydrogeologically not connected to this natural river. The water you'll see in terms of clarity and other features, it very much looks different, but it's just a bit of an interesting situation and adds a bit of complexity to our surveying efforts and also our management area action. On with the show. Just some pictures of what we found that first summer there. You know, there were fairly sizable populations there. We're able to map them all off. Nice mature plants, and especially as we started to get more eastern towards the city of Welland, that's really where we started to see free-floating plants, not rooted plants, which is really helpful to think back about how the species spreads and maybe signals to us a little bit of extra information on where it's been well established. Now, I would say right before we did our survey, there was a pretty heavy rainfall just a couple of days before. And so if we start to think about what are the impacts of that, very likely that the water level came up, and some of that storm action certainly has the ability to dislodge plants. So just kind of interesting that we saw a number of free-floating plants well outside the established and well-rooted part of the population, part of our delimitation survey. So just kind of interesting. I think it also adds a little bit more confidence, I think, in our understanding of where is that leading line of established, where were plants growing early in the spring that year, and where would we be likely to find the leading edge. So all kind of interesting clues, I guess, in our invasive species detective work. I just wanted to note here, just a beautiful shot more than anything else, but a great example of some of the work that some of our partners were able to do. So Ducks Unlimited Canada were able to come, you know, I think we're trying to find opportunities and be opportunistic outside of just the work that we need to do, which is map and control this, but let's take advantage of other opportunities. So Ducks is working on a drone mapping effort and trying to stretch the edges of their capabilities on how they map emergent vegetation. So they were able to put that to use, and more than anything, it's just a beautiful picture with that heron there. Lots of European water chestnut and other macrophytes as well. And in terms of the quick actions we were able to take just for a really small but early win, we're able to design with our partners at OFAH and Ducks and some others there, some nice boat launch survey or signage rather. And we understand this, of course, isn't going to you know, win the battle in itself, but if nothing else, we're able to have those out for our delimitation survey in summer 2021. But kind of a quick small win, but just something so that people can understand, if they're not familiar with the plant, what it is that they're looking at when they're using their waterway, and hopefully stop curbing the spread through overland transfer of boats. Back to the theme of making lemonade out of lemons and being opportunistic. Just wanted to note we were able to use another project we're working on with our partners at Green Shovels on environmental DNA. And so I just wanted to note that was included. We were able to, it was one of our first eDNA survey projects. So that was in 2021, and then since in 2022, we've expanded the effort a bit more. The central idea here being, because it's a river system with somewhat predictable flow, but not entirely, it does change directions periodically. But generally, the central tenet here is go where EWC isn't, or where you think it isn't, take some eDNA samples and just kind of further build out your confidence, I suppose, that indeed you understand the limit of the species. And it's not a perfect number, but I think we're looking at somewhere approximately 0.5 kilometer of sensitivity. So if we can go 1 or 2 or 3 kilometers outside of truly where the leading edge is, we should be picking up zeros. And I just wanted to note it's an additional tool in our toolbox. It's not individually going to solve and answer the question, where is European water chestnut? But I think it's a neat idea of how we're trying to be resourceful and make use of other programs and opportunities to further understand where EWC is. And with that said, I'll turn the show over to our star, to Karen.
I may have stopped sharing the webinar.
Yeah, we just lost your screen, Karen, if you want to try and reshare again.
Sorry about that. One moment.
All good. And just a quick plug too, if anybody has any questions at any time, please feel free to toss them in the Q&A function.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Colin. Thanks for joining, everyone. So great overview of European water chestnut. And for now, for the rest of the presentation, I'd like to walk you through our response, our rapid response program, what we did to address the issue of chestnut in the Welland River, and share with you some of our preliminary results. Trying to figure out how to advance the slide here, sorry. There we go. So, once we decided that we were going to initiate a rapid response program, we had to put some thought into what we were going to develop. So we knew we wanted to control the plant. We knew we wanted to educate and engage the community, local partners, local support. And we knew we would also require a communications plan to pull together materials and have some events and opportunities to engage the audiences we were looking to engage in the Welland River. So we needed the funding first off to start this initiative. So we looked into several options, and we were actually quite fortunate to have the MNRF, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, offered to support the program in year one. So once we had that funding, we did move on to figure out what our control plan would be. Like, how were we going to go after this plant? What equipment would we need? What's our team going to look like? What permits do we need? So same with the partnerships and local support, a lot of thought went into who we would need on our team to make this happen out in the Welland River. So for the first part of my presentation, I'd like to walk you through some of that, and then we'll switch into the preliminary results. So for control planning, the first thing we did was some research. What we wanted to understand other areas of Ontario and what their control programs look like, so we could make some decisions about what might work in the Welland River. So we spoke with biologists at Ducks Unlimited Canada and Voyageur Provincial Park to really get that understanding of how their control programs were working. And what we found out is the best management practices occurring in Ontario or being developed right now really broke European water chestnut into kind of two scenarios, where you have these huge extensive mats that we saw earlier in the presentation at Voyageur Provincial Park that really require these larger equipments, like in the two pictures in the top screen there, bigger pieces of equipment and more effort to kind of get that biomass out of the river before the plant goes to seed every year. So not beyond the power of just hand pulling at that point in those situations. But then there's also the smaller patches of European water chestnut that can be mixed with native vegetation. And those scenarios are quite appropriate for hand pulling from or using small rakes or wading using boats, small boats. And the intent being, as long as you're pulling the plant or aiming to pull the plant before it goes to seed, Voyageur documented a 95% reduction in seed viability within 4 years. We have to keep our mind on the fact that the seeds may be viable for up to 10 years. So we didn't want to, or so we want to kind of maintain that vision on the long-term control plan, but in the short term, the 1 to 4 years, the hand pulling and the heavy equipment the hand pulling makes a really big difference. So knowing that, we took a look back to our situation at the Welland River, and we know that this is the kind of worst of the extent. When we don't have those monoculture mats quite yet, but we had long stretches of the river that looked like this, that had, the beginnings of these monoculture mats. And this pattern kind of persisted over long lengths of river. And the river being also a very key difference between what was going on in Welland and the parks out in Eastern Ontario, where they're working in more embayments and wetland habitat. We had this really long 33-kilometer stretch of river to get this plant out of. So it really changed the way we were thinking about how to create a control plan. We also had a lot of native vegetation spread into the chestnut, and we wanted to make sure we were protecting it. And then we also uniquely had these scattered small clusters of chestnut and floating plants in the river that we didn't want to miss if we were to say choose a larger equipment. We wanted the team to have, that precision, that ability to get into all the nooks and crannies of the river and see all the individual plants that could be out there. So we ended up going with a kind of blended version of what was going on in Eastern Ontario, where we employed the team with 2 canoes and a small watercraft here on the screen. And we went with the hand pulling. We needed to be able to transport the biomass, so we chose rubber bins with lids. And the idea being because of the river system and the length of the river, we needed the team to have a way to be precise with the canoes, but also move the biomass with the help and aid of a power tool, the motorboat. So that kind of saved them from having to paddle the river with the biomass up and down. Keeping in mind, we knew not very much about the river yet. So we had limited river access, and we knew that paddling back and forth could be a limitation to our ability to get all the chestnut out there. So we kind of, realizing all of that, went with this hand pulling method with small boats, including the small water boat. The other piece we liked about having the watercraft with a power engine is for emergencies, the team would be able to exit the river very quickly. So this just kind of gives you a better overview of our vision for what we were thinking would work in the Welland River. So we have the hand pulling into bins in the canoe. We transfer those bins over to the motorboat. Motorboat takes the biomass to shore, and then we properly dispose the biomass in determined locations, which we hadn't yet figured that out, but we were thinking this control plan could work. And the biomass disposal is really important because, as Colin mentioned, the chestnut is prohibited in Ontario, which means it's actually illegal to transport and possess the plant. And anyone boating in infested waters, this would be us. We're out there trying to control it. We're in the water with the chestnut. We need to avoid spreading the plants. We need to take care not to clean our equipment when we leave the water and travel over land, and then dispose those plants so that they won't end up back in the water. The MNRF actually has what's called a prevention and response plan that provided us that guidance on how we would need to handle the plant from the water to the biomass disposal and while we're controlling it. This the plan authorizes certain activities under the Invasive Species Act that can be implemented by specific groups or people. It's really, think of it as a guidance document that describes how you can control of legislated species like chestnut, that allows you to do that without contravening the act. Oops, sorry, not ready to advance that yet. So ISC, as a not-for-profit, was authorized by this plan to possess and transport, and for the purpose of controlling the species, as long as we followed these conditions. So you'll notice that it only applies to hand pulling or human-powered control methods. If we have to take reasonable precautions that we're not spreading the plant. Clean equipment protocol is required, which is where the bins came in too, where we wanted to really secure that plant well. So in the bins, lid goes on, bins go in the truck if necessary, and we really wanted to make sure we weren't losing any piece of plant while transporting and then disposing the plant on dry land. So you're aiming for about 30-meter distance from any other body of water. And we also had to notify the ministry once the program got started. The other step we took during control planning was that we knew there were species at risk in the river. And we really wanted to make sure that anything we did not cause these species harm. We know many endangered mussels find refuge in the Welland River, and we thought, this plant has the seed down to the substrate. We're going to be disturbing that substrate when we're pulling the plant. We really wanted to get that guidance on, if we do this, how can we, keep the harm to a minimum? So we did go through the step of applying for what's called an incidental harm permit from the DFO. And so our biologists there were really helpful and provided some great guidance on how to take care to monitor for the mussels when we were pulling the biomass out of the river. And they asked for us to photograph any encounters and then take some location data so that we could share that information with them if we found anything. So those are most of the steps we took thinking about control planning. So in our minds, we have this idea and how we're going to do it now. We knew we needed partnerships. We couldn't do it alone. So we started making phone calls. The Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters was one of our first calls because they have this amazing hit squad program, and we thought it could be a really good fit. They helped us apply to that hit squad program, asking for funding for 4 technicians on the project. We were successful. And so once we heard that, we started planning to bring on this team. What was that going to look like? What safety training did we need? We took the step to secure a small motorboat operation and safety consultant because we really wanted to give the team that 4 days of practice, of training, and a heavy focus on the health and safety before we kind of left them on the river every day. Are they comfortable with the equipment? Do they know the methods to remove the plant? Does everybody understand, the health and safety required? We did boat launch visits and we practiced with the truck and trailer and really built the confidence in the field team and with the partnership with OFAH. The next partner that was absolutely key to the success of this was the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. They came to the table with so much in-kind contribution. Can't thank them enough. We presented to the NPCA board and brought the issue to the board and staff, and they offered to be home base for the OFAH hit squad team, providing Chippewa Creek Conservation Area for equipment storage and a place for the team to meet and leave their cars every day and kind of get in the work truck together. And it worked out very well and gave the team kind of a place to meet and end the day. And just having that location and being, near other conservation staff really helped the team in the summer. They gave access to the river. They had 2 properties. We were so lucky. EC Brown on the east side of the infestation, and Chippewa Creek was way on the west side. Both had really great small boat access. So we were able to use those locations as needed. And they also solved our biomass problem, which was worrisome at the beginning, because, what are we going to do with all these plants? And NPCA offered biomass storage at EC Brown in the plantation. And you'll see that this is an aerial image of EC Brown. And in the top of the screen is the plantation and the property where we stored the biomass. And then Chippewa Creek actually had a yard waste disposal area, which was absolutely perfect for us to put all of the plants at the end of the year. Other partners we knew we wanted to engage in this program, the municipalities, key partners here. We went to the 4 municipalities here on the screen because their areas touched the river that is impacted. So we took the time to request delegations to council and went with the information. We brought the story to council in the intent to kind of say, hey, we have this problem. We want to go and do something about it. We want you to be aware of what we're doing in the river, and we're looking for your partnership. Like, how can you support this program? And all 4 townships were incredibly helpful, supportive, and immediately offered to help in any way that we needed. And the obvious fit for the townships and the city of Welland was the assistance with outreach to the community. So we knew that they were keen to help in that space. And we continued conversations with local organizations, groups like the Niagara Peninsula Paddlers Club, Burt Miller Nature Club, Niagara College. We just started making phone calls to see, who is interested, who would like to help, how they would like to help. And we found just absolute nothing but support and interest. So with that knowledge, we were able to create a pretty great communications plan. We knew how these audiences would prefer to be involved. So we kind of took that knowledge and built this plan. We obviously, our focus wanted to be on control of the plant, but the benefit of outreach and education is huge, and we needed to spend some time in that space as well. So we hosted these 2 Paddle with a Purpose events, and I'll talk a bit about those in a minute. for the comms plan, we created a promotional kit that kind of included an information package, like a info sheet. We did social media, like mock posts that could be cut and pasted into different platforms. We had images to go along with those. We built a home or a website or a web page on our own website and asked partners to link to that site. And we included in that kit a Riverfront landowner letter. This was a huge one because we knew we had limited access to the river, and we thought, what if Riverfront landowners could be engaged? Are there anyone along the river that might put their hand up and offer things like health breaks for the team, maybe alternate launch points, washrooms even? So we thought, let's ask. We have nothing to lose, so we asked the townships and the city of Welland to send that letter out on our behalf, and they all did that. And I'll talk about the impact of that letter later on. The last thing we did for outreach this summer was attended this Ducks Unlimited Outdoor Festival, which we also gained a lot of value from, and I'll show you that later as well. But I just wanted to use this slide to show you that communications plan that we created as a result of all of that collaborative conversations with the partners. So we had our control plan, we had our partnerships established and a collaborative effort in like ready to go, and we had our comms plan. So we implemented, the program started, the training was in late June, and the team got on the water the beginning of July and spent 8 weeks removing the plant. Here's a picture of our fabulous team. We had the 2022 OFAH Hit Squad team. So Mason, Brandon, Bree, and Elizabeth. And then Katie Church, our team lead, was an ISC employee, and Sarah Rang, our executive director, was able to attend one of the Paddle with a Purpose events this summer. And this picture was just a great shot of our team. So, you know, the program brought 4 or 5 jobs to the local Niagara region. And you know, this team spent, like I said, every day on the river, unless it was a rain day, and you know, went through the process of, you know, loading the equipment, equipment checks, health and safety chats, control plans for the day, and then they launched and paddled various sections of the river all summer, hand pulling and putting that information into our ArcGIS field maps, which is what we use to track progress. They did paddle the river 3 times the full stretch of river, and spent many more hours looking very closely at specific areas of the river that had very thick infestation. So they spent more time returning to those spots to make sure that they were pulling the regrowth. And this map shows you preliminary results of that effort. So what we're seeing here, well, first of all, we're still processing all the data. Remember, they just got off the river last week on Friday. But what we do know is we've pulled more than 7,000 plants, and we traveled over 33 kilometers of river. And this map showing these 3 levels of infestation, it was kind of the quickest way to pull this data together to show you something today. High is anything above 400 plants found in that stretch of river, which is a lot of plants. And you can see that one arm of river, that little stretch, was absolutely the worst spot, and they spent a lot of time there. The medium is orange, anything less than 400 plants. And then the yellow is important too, because we found no plants in that stretch, in those stretches all summer long. I just want to pause and say, on the screen from EC Brown, which is here, the launch point, into Welland, and this stretch in the city of Welland is showing as orange, which says less than 400 plants. But in reality, this stretch here, we'll call it the very far advancing arm of the infestation, there was just 5 plants all summer long. And then this stretch between EC Brown and Welland was, you know, not as high as 400. I can't give you the full number, but what I can tell you is that it was mostly scattered individual plants. So what that tells us is the bulk of the infestation is EC Brown and west. And, you know, you could call that the advancing edge of the infestation as far as we know. The biomass, as I said, we are grateful to the NPCA for their help with storage. We put the biomass at EC Brown here on the map. Actually looks like it's labeled Riley's Bridge, but it's EC Brown. And then Chippewa Creek Conservation Area over here. We also took the step at the end of the season to rake up all the biomass at EC Brown and actually move it to Chippewa Creek, because at Chippewa Creek, the yard waste area is south of the river road. So we really wanted to put everything where it had absolutely no chance of getting back into the river. And then this red icon here on the screen, I wanted to just mention this because that landowner letter went out and we did have one private land offer. We didn't ultimately use it, but what a kind gesture to offer to take dead decaying biomass onto your land all summer. So I just wanted to shout out that landowner and say thank you. The lines of communication are open, and we may want to use that site in future years. And then on the community support front, that landowner letter went out to everyone along that stretch of river between Welland Port and the city of Welland. And we had such great response. We used the EDDMapS app to track that in-kind offer from the community, because we wanted the field team to be able to see where they could make stops and had permission to say, get out of the boat and stretch their legs, or use a dock or launch a canoe if they needed. So we had these icons that we placed in the map. So as you can see, we had a pretty great response from the community. Things like emergency exits, and even a couple of landowners offered their washrooms, that their homes were open for the team if they needed a washroom break. We had 6 landowners, we called them friendly landowners, that replied to that direct mail out. All of them offered lunch breaks and emergency exits, and some were also able to provide canoe launches and docks to tie up the boat. So quite a successful response to a very simple letter, and the impact of this contribution from the community is just huge. One of the examples I can give you is one of the boat launches. Having access to that middle stretch of the river was a game changer for the control program, because prior to access, we were launching at EC Brown and Welland Port Community Center and having to paddle west or east to get to that central part, which we knew is the most or the densest area of the river. It was taking 2 hours a day to go one way to get into those thick parts of the problem. So as soon as we had these river accesses open up, it was a game changer. We were able to make huge strides in getting rid of those dense populations by just a simple gesture of, here, use my canoe launch as needed. The Paddle with a Purpose events, we hosted those in July, and we had 55 people turn out to both events, and they were just a resounding success, very well received. The community came out to learn about Chestnut. The team gave an overview of the problem, and then they all got in boats and paddled to see the plant in the river. And the thought being that if someone can learn to identify water chestnut in the water, they're now empowered to make these observations in the Welland River or other tributaries in Niagara, or maybe other tributaries in Ontario. And we really wanted to build that that community science approach that was so successful in launching this rapid response in the first place. So very positive turnout, positive results there. And I think the other piece that is kind of hidden behind the Chestnut story is that there may be more interest in attendees in invasive species in general now. What we've hopefully opened their eyes to the fact that looking for vegetation or having something kind of stick out to them in their regular paddling areas is worth reporting, because it could lead to a rapid response and protection of or responding to these invaders that are coming in. The Ducks Unlimited Outdoor Festival, also a really awesome experience for the team to get into a larger event and talk more generally about invasive species in the program. At this event, we reached 60 people who came to our booth and asked questions and learned about the Chestnut program, rapid response program. We had an estimated several hundred attendees went through the event. And I think, this one opportunity that we had to kind of take the program and invasive species education in general to the broader public, the people that may not show up with a boat and go on a tour or live on the river and get a letter, just that general public awareness and outreach on what's going on. I think we'd love to do more of this in future years, things like farmers markets, other events. It's just, finding those key places the message can be delivered and really spread the awareness of European water chestnut and other invasive species. And I think the other theme of our presentation here today is that there's other opportunities to build in ancillary benefits, I suppose, to these rapid response investments. So we think back to that invasion curve at the beginning, we know prevention investments are going to give you the largest economic return, but it's even larger when you start adding in some of these additional benefits of opportunities that you can build into your program. So you have a team on the river, they're out there every day, and they're also making other observations. Things like native species. We know the river is of extreme ecological importance to the Niagara region. There's many provincially significant wetlands. And during the field work, the team made notes of observations of 12 different native species. The blue heron, the northern water snake, and some species at risk like snapping turtles and other turtle species. They also saw belted kingfisher and just so many other native species. And it's really just a testament to how important this river really is and how detrimental the effects of something like European water chestnut could have on the ecosystem. They also saw a lot of recreation. The river is just a very well-used system for recreational paddling and angling. And, again, the threat of chestnut could really change the community's ability to enjoy and gain benefits like ecosystem services from this system. It's really a reminder of why we're doing this work. The other thing the team did out there on the river every day is made observations of other invasive species. Water lettuce being a key one that showed up late in the summer, and the team kind of being out there every day said, hey, this is different. What is this? And sent the photos, and we recognized it as water lettuce. And they actually pulled every water lettuce plant that they saw. They were able to do that. And, that's a definite extra benefit of having that team out there. We responded rapidly to water lettuce as well. And actually, side note, one of our riverfront landowners used to be a member of the Welland River keepers. So when he replied to our letter, made mention that in the past they had been out on the river pulling water lettuce. And so it's just a really awesome benefit that our team was out there and able to kind of complement that earlier investment in rapid response and get rid of what they saw this year as well. They saw flowering rush, phragmites, purple loosestrife zebra mussels, all the bigger species that are much further along the curve than water lettuce or chestnut, but still great observations, and reminds us that these invasive species are coming, and these rapid response efforts are really worth our while. And then finally, Colin already mentioned these programs, but we were able to incorporate them again this year. The Ducks Unlimited came out again with their drone to do some mapping and kind of investigate whether or not high volumes of data can be really quickly processed using AI technology to map invasive species like European water chestnut. So they were out earlier in the year and are processing that data. And then we also went out and did the eDNA sampling again. So we chose 12 sampling locations outside of the known extent, so in spaces around the Niagara region, and collected 60 samples. So that data is being processed as well. And the point being, can we use these tools? Can we incorporate new ideas into this project while we're investing in rapid response to really amplify the impact of the investment in prevention. And there's the team there enjoying a lesson on what eDNA sampling looks like. And yeah. So I think, you know, to wrap up here, the importance of rapid response programs is really growing in Ontario. We were fortunate enough to have the resources to respond to European water chestnut in the Welland River this year, but there are many other species coming. Spotted lanternfly, oakwilt, marbled crayfish, Japanese stiltgrass. These are all species that are arriving in Ontario now or threatening to arrive. And, you know, we really have to be thinking in the conservation community about those prevention investments. And it can be challenging to get going, but small amounts of funds, you know, set aside for rapid response could be one way to really be ready for something that might land in your area. And then we also think that collaboration is imperative. I don't think we would have gotten anywhere near as far as we did without the partnerships that we were able to incorporate from the NPCA, OFAH, the local municipalities were just absolutely key partners. Can't thank them enough. And the landowner response was, you know, really well received, and very grateful for the community support. So investing in that engagement and community engagement is really key to getting these rapid response activities up and running. And then I think the last thing we keep thinking about is, you know, we're focused on this short-term investment, you know, 1 to 4 years, let's get rid of this infestation. But we also have to be thinking long-term. We know the seed viability, as Colin mentioned, is up to, you know, 11 years, 10 years. But we can't be running these large programs every year, and not to mention the plant density drops. So there's not necessarily a need for a team of 5 anymore. But, you know, we didn't want to let that fear of not knowing where the program was going to go in the future and what the needs would be to stop us from doing anything. So we really wanted to take that opportunity from to do something now, and then build those collaborative relationships to help us navigate those future needs for the program. So kind of focusing short-term, thinking long-term. Our next steps in the program, the team took the time to write down quite a bit of feedback. We did a little survey and thank them for that. A lot of ways to improve. This was year 1, so opportunities to just improve the overall experience for the field team, things like canoe seats, better comfortable canoe seats, like easy things we can do to improve the overall program and the effectiveness and the experience for the team in the ground. We want to put a year 1 project summary sheet together so that we can communicate to our partners in a, you know, quick and simple form on the impact of our investment this year. And we're starting to prepare and look for resources for our next field season. So thank you very much. I think that wraps up our rapid response program. The next webinar for ISC is September 6th, I believe. Yes, at 1 p.m. on the Eastern Spruce Budworm. So I encourage you to attend that. And if you can't make it, just know all our webinars are recorded and posted on our website. Thanks everyone for attending, and I think we'll move into questions and discussions.
Great, thank you, Karen. I just called up the Q&A, and just a quick reminder, that's a helpful resource if anybody wants to throw some questions in there. There's a few coming in. So Karen, I've taken a quick attempt here at just trying to answer a few of them throughout the presentation just to keep us moving. But there was a really good question in here just on kind of the nitty-gritty parts of removal. So somebody's just asking about, you know, fat trakes, long-handled, you know, what was your removal tactic? And the question was about those free-floating plants. So I don't know, do you want to share some thoughts, I guess, on the easy free floaters and also some of those rooted plants that were removed this year?
Sure. Yeah, the technique that the team used was, what you're attempting to do is get the whole plant right out of the system, right? And we know it roots to the substrate. So the technique is to kind of wrap your hand or grab the rosette in the center and kind of rotate until you feel that seed release from the substrate. And call it an art form, I think. You know, the team starting out, you know, the first few times you do it, you can feel the stem snap. and you go, oh darn, gotta come back. But because the plant will regrow from that snap stem, so your goal is to kind of get that whole plant. And it was pretty quick. They picked it up and found it really satisfying to get the whole plant and get that seed and get it up onto the boat. The free floaters are just a bit easier, where you're just making sure you're shaking the plant a bit and not getting any native vegetation or pulling just the plant up. And because it's floating, it's, you know, a little bit easier to just kind of pick it out of the water.
It was neat. There were observations from the field crew I picked up last week where there were a few that did snap, like you said, Karen. Like, I mean, they pulled 7,000 plants. So, you know, a dozen snaps is a pretty good number. But they were saying they, like, late in the season, were able to find, like, kind of mid-August and onwards, find what was probably the remnants of that root regrowing, because it might have 2 or 3 small rosettes coming in off of it, really, really small in size. So very clearly we're not plants that were missed early in the summer, kind of that regrowing next generation. So yeah, just kind of neat to know that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, as you say, we thought about rakes, and turns out the good old fashioned hand pulling, I think Katie says it best by saying, zhuzhing the roots out, like just kind of jigging them out, seems to be a pretty good technique.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the rakes probably would create more breaks in the stem. So yeah, they preferred the hand pulling, and it just keep on pulling all summer long.
That's it. A few good housekeeping notes here. So someone's just asking if the slides are available. We've got the recording that's available, and if anybody would like slides, if that's helpful for you for your organizations, just let us know. Maybe shoot us an email. We can send them off one-on-one. Somebody's asking about field maps. That's what we use, field maps, and it was a really useful tool. Some of our team had no experience with GIS in the past too. So if field maps is new to you or you're considering it, I think probably our feedback was a really helpful tool, even for some staff that didn't have any experience with it. Really easy to pick up.
Yeah, field maps replaced Arc Collector, if you're not aware of that. It's just an updated version of the ArcGIS in-field map app that you download to your smartphone.
Perfect. Somebody's asking if they can have a copy of the letter shared with some of the shoreline residents. Maybe if you just want to elaborate, I've said no problem, but Karen, just some maybe more thoughts on the value of that. Like, what did that do for us?
Oh, for sure. That letter described the program and kind of hinted at some of the things that a riverfront landowner might offer if they had, say, a canoe launch. Could they make it available? And I think, you know, very thankful to the municipalities to who sent that out to the riverfront landowners on our behalf. And, you know, the response of a simple letter from the community was just huge. And I think happy to share that to others. I think, yeah, there's like a fine line between how much do you put into direct mail to the community and how much you would then try to hit that community with other tactics like general outreach events or posters or, you know, other networks like through the NPCA mail out or following and OFAH following. So we kind of chose to target just the landowners along the river with that letter and used other communications tactics elsewhere, but happy to share that letter if people want to see it or use it to kind of increase awareness.
And on this project in particular, what a great value add for the municipality, right? Like, they wanted to have a role. I don't think it would be cost prohibitive, to your points about us trying to figure out those addresses. Yeah. Hand deliver might be an option, but it's 35 or so kilometers of river, so not likely. So yeah, what a great role.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a huge contribution.
There's a really good question here, Karen. I'll throw it to you about just this idea of controlling non-target invasive species as a bit of an added benefit and kind of supplemental win of the project with respect to water lettuce being a good one. And so they're asking for any guidance, I guess, or thoughts on how others could perhaps build that into their programming when they're looking for one species or managing one species. Like, probably depends on your situation, but any thoughts on, I guess, the threshold of, you know, if they were out controlling every bit of frag they saw, that might be a little bit, we wouldn't have got through all the water chestnut. So any thoughts there?
I think it's a great point. And, you know, you can't get diverted from your main goal, right? And I think we saw the lettuce come in so late in the summer that the team had been or had moved into this monitoring and surveillance stage. So it was relatively easy for them to incorporate pulling water lettuce as they were continuing to look for chestnut. So I think it was an easy decision for us to say, yes, you're moving through the water, and you can easily include that rapid response to water lettuce as well. I think if they had messaged us and said, there's water lettuce along, 5-6 kilometers of river, we may have not decided to start hand pulling it, but it was, something that we thought we could incorporate without losing sight on the actual goal. So we did. I don't know, yeah.
And even outside of control activities too, right? Just maybe some of the added value of just mapping for additional species of interest, like flowering rush is a relatively uncommon species, invasive, but uncommon on that system. So, easy decision, throw an EDDMapS report or an INAT report in every time you see those 5 plants that ended up spotting. But yeah, every time we see Phragmites, that might be challenging.
That's right. Yeah, you got to decide that some species are just here established well along that invasion curve. And yes, we know Phragmites is along the Welland River. Yeah.
There's a great question coming in here, Karen, from with respect to water lettuce. So I'll just take that if that's okay. But the question is, any evidence that water lettuce can overwinter in Ontario? Last I heard it was doubtful, but there seems to be some who think that it could as well. That's not a species of our expertise, but I would say there's been a couple of longer term legacy populations in Southern Ontario in particular that probably make me have a gut feel, again, just anecdotal, not in the literature, that it seems reasonable. There was a historic population of water lettuce in the Welland River that was managed or has been managed too. So I don't think we could answer that definitively to the question asker, but I think there's a couple of examples, especially also in the Windsor area, of historic populations also seeming to be continually present in subsequent years, unless that's a reintroduction, which strikes my gut as being unlikely, but no definitive answer on that question, but a great question. Karen, there's a great note here from someone who lives in the region there, and they say, thanks for hosting the event at EC Brown. I've been along the river many times this summer since then, having covered 20 clicks, 40 each way, between Welland and upstream of Robert Land Academy, which is really helpful because that's definitely, we hope, outside of the distribution. I saw only one single instance. I removed one plant in early July near the 2x4 restaurant, so that's within our known distribution. So that's great to know. And I saw some bald eagles too. Thanks again. So just a nice note coming in. Great example of community response. Thanks, Joseph, for that.
Thank you.
Do those plants that regrow produce seeds? Another question. So we did see those kind of snapped roots, right, come up, and I think we caught them early enough, but I think if we had left those plants to grow, maybe, Karen, it seems useful that within a couple of weeks they would have been able to produce seeds, eh?
I think, that's their point. They're coming up, they're trying to get that seed produced. So it's the question of when we pulled them in the season and when that stem snapped, if it happened in, say, early July, there might be enough time for that plant to create a rosette, flower, and make seed. But, if the stem's snapping in late August, probably not enough time. So I think it's pretty variable. So they can produce more seed. Hopefully the response program removed enough of the population that we've depleted the ability of the plant to kind of multiply exponentially. But there's always that chance. I think that's why it takes 4+ years.
Absolutely. We've got another question in with respect to timing. So we're in Niagara, so a little bit different from probably, I think, what our partners at Ducks would have seen in Lake Ontario and Kingston area, and also what Voyager Provincial Park in Eastern Ontario would have seen. But with respect to the region we're working in, approximately when would the plants top out and reach the surface of the season, and how late in the season would seeds mature?
So what we see in Welland is late June, early July, the plants are reaching the surface and really forming that rosette, and kind of the rosette starts to spread. Mid-July, the plant is starting to show flowering, and early August to mid-August, the seeds are maturing and dropping. So you have that very small window of when you can see the plant coming up and when you want to get it all before it goes to seed. So it's that added challenge as this plant kind of exponentially spreads to kind of address it with this rapid response approach, because if you can't get the whole population, then you are kind of piecemealing it and returning and trying to, you've got a bigger project on your hands. This one, we were able to successfully remove the population at least once.
Yeah. Okay, another question coming in here. Has or will there be any consideration to consider herbicides such as reward as a management tool in your project? Not sure if that would work on deeply rooted plants.
Yeah, at this point, I don't think herbicides appropriate. I think the hand pulling, we got in before we needed to go to those tools. The hand pulling is working right now, and I think we're going to keep going down that road. I think herbicide comes in when you're dealing with large stands that you can't realistically hand pull before the seed shows up.
Yeah, and I'd also add, some other EWC control projects have had that be the best practice, even just for parts of their management approach. So, for instance, potentially contaminated sediments or other kind of really specific conditions that might be different in other projects. Maybe that does change the calculus on best practices. But yeah, as Karen said, I think within the context of this particular project, it's at the right scale. We've caught it at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
One of the final questions coming in here, just I think we answered it, but just in case, how did you get all the property owner names and contact information along the river?
Oh, yeah, we didn't. We went to the municipality and asked them to forward the letter on our behalf. Yeah, that would have taken a really long time for us to create that list, and we just respectfully asked the municipalities to forward that letter, and they did.
Yeah, that was an awesome contribution. I think it speaks to, we know what we can do well, and we know what some of our partners could be able to do more efficiently. So a great example of an outcome of the project is just, and again, same with the Conservation Authority, NPCA was fantastic. And just what we didn't have was a proper site to call home base, to store a boat, to all that, to dispose of the plant material in a protected way, until they came on board. So just a great example of looking for friends and building relationships and the importance and value add that could contribute.
Absolutely. Can't thank them enough.
I'm sorry, I think I've got through all, but I kind of skipped order, so I apologize if I missed anybody, but we're always around and we'd love to talk about the project more if that's of interest to anybody. So if I did miss you and you have a question, please let us know. But again, we're happy to distribute the recording of this and also pass along some slides to anyone who requests. The letter as an example, anything we can do. I think our project is probably as strong as it was because of the ability of us to make use of other partners. So if we can be used in the same way to relay resources and information, we'd love to fill that role. So Karen, thank you so much for your presentation today. It was fantastic and great to see it all wrap up. And again, look for us on the water again next year to any local residents who are joining us today. Yep. So with that, thank you everybody and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Colin. Thanks, everyone.